Okay, so let's get started on this tutorial. First thing we need to do before we really get started is review the footage. So I'm going to open JFA right here, and I'm also going to open up the folder with the sequences. And let's take a look at the first shot. And hit F and let it load up. And I can already see we don't have anything to really do in this shot. This shot is them walking, and then he has his dialogue. We don't really have to add the mural to this shot, so we don't have anything to do here. There'll be some color correction and stuff later on, but for now, not much to do. So let's grab the second shot where we do have to put the mural on the wall, and we will let that load up in here so we can check it out. Yeah, and what we're gonna do? Let me walk you through what we're gonna do here. It's very straightforward, very simple. We're going to track this footage, and you can see it's a handheld shot, so it's kind of wobbling, rotating. There's probably a little perspective change. It's probably subtle, but you can see if you watch his head and there's a little bit of shifting, so we can safely assume there's a tiny bit of shifting on this wall as well. So we're going to do a corner pin track, not just a standard track. We're going to track 4 corners here, kind of roughly where we're going to put the mural. And it looks like everything stays in frame very nicely. So I think it's going to be a pretty easy track. And then we're going to put the mural right here with the spray painted graffiti over top of it. And also what we're going to have to do, you can see there's 2 windows here. This window... it'd be really nice if when we put the mural here that this window wasn't there, just to give us kind of a flatter spot to really showcase the artwork and kind of just drive not have distractions in there as well. This is right where her face would be, so we're gonna remove this window as well, and we're gonna track this corner pin thing one time, and we're gonna use that throughout the entire project. So yeah, let's get started. Let's open up Natron and bring in some footage. I'm going to, actually, let me show you one more way you can bring in some footage. If you go right here, we want mural shot 2. Just click and drag it into here, and there it is. Brings it in, sets the frame range exactly as necessary. You can see it's 181 to 274. I realize that's a strange number, but I kind of just wanted to illustrate that happens. So let's hit S and let's lock our frame range, and we can change this as well. This footage is actually 2997 that came out of my camera, so let's go ahead and change that to not 2997. It's really not going to make that much of a big deal, because we're going to render a frame sequence, and a frame sequence, when you compile the final output movie, then it's going to matter. But honestly, in here, it doesn't matter too much, but let's just set it anyway. And to see the footage, let's hit 1 to plug it into the viewer. So here's our footage, and if we want to take a look at it, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my, render the entire frame. And I'm going to go ahead and click play forward. And you'll see it's loading it up into RAM. Into the cache, it's creating a green line so you know it's in there, and I can move it around while it's playing, zoom in and out while it's playing. If you had this button turned off, you could not do that. It would want to be recalculating every time you did anything. That's another good reason to use that button a lot. So this looks pretty good, so let's go ahead and start our track. First thing we're going to do is go back to the first frame, which is frame 181. Excuse me, still getting over a cough. And we're going to bring in a tracker node. So a lot of these nodes have keyboard shortcuts, but some don't. A lot of the most useful ones do, such as blur. If you hit B, it'll bring in a blur. If you hit T for transform, it'll bring in a transform. These are just unbelievably useful. You use them in almost every composite you ever do. M is another one. And I'm clicking, like I'll go right here, I'll click, and then when I create another node, that's where it's going to drop it. So that's what I'm doing, kind of to get nodes exactly where I want them. Merge is basically how you put something over something else. Incredibly useful. We'll also use this a lot with rotoscoping. Speaking of rotoscoping, that's O on your keyboard. You see it creates a roto node, and the roto node actually, you'll notice it has a bunch of tools here for drawing the masks and working with the masks, and it's got a bunch of layers. It's got kind of like a big menu here of, as you're creating masks, it starts piling them up here and you can work with them as well. There's also a paint node. If you hit P, very similar to rotoscoping. It does do rotoscoping. If you only ever want to use this node, you can do it. But it also has some paint tools and some clone tools. You'll see when I hover in the window, I've got a little brush here. And then it's got the same kind of interface over here in the properties as the roto node. And then the last two that are among the most useful are color correction nodes. So the basic color correction that's the most common is G. If you hit G, you get a grade node. This is incredibly useful. And then the color correct node is C. You get that, and these are actually very similar in a lot of ways. Some are, you'll only through experience will you learn kind of which one's better for which. And you also notice that they have these, every value here has 4 inputs: red, green, blue, and alpha channel. This is a very precise way of working. If you'd rather have sliders, you can turn off this little number 4 next to each one, and you'll see it goes right back to sliders. Or you can turn those back on if you like. I actually prefer the sliders unless I'm dialing in something very specific, and then I'll switch it to that. And you will also notice that, say on the blur, for example, there's a little number 2 next to it. The blur will affect both X and Y unless you click on that, and now you can control X and Y individually. So those are useful. But these right here are actually the most useful nodes you're going to have in here. So by the end of this course, you'll know every shortcut for these. Well, maybe not that one, but these ones you're going to know very well. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all those for now. And unfortunately, there is no keyboard shortcut for a tracker. So I'm just going to hit Tab and start typing track. And you can see it right there. It's the first one. I'm just going to hit Enter. And there's our tracker node. And yours may be a different color. I've set all mine, because I work in Nuke all day long for my job, I'm very used to seeing the colors that Nuke uses. So I expect any transform nodes to be this color, purple. I expect roto nodes to be green. I expect merges to be blue, things like that. So I've kind of shifted all of my, you can go up here under Edit Preferences, and under Appearance, under Node Graph, you can adjust all your colors however you like. I've set mine to match Nuke. You can feel free to leave the defaults or do whatever you like. So if mine look weird, that's why. So we've got some extra play buttons up here now for the tracker. These are the tracking, these track forward, track back, 1 frame, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and dive in and track our first thing. Let's make sure again you're on frame 181, the first frame, and we're going to track this thing here. And Natron actually uses Blender's tracking engine. So if you've used Blender for tracking at all, while this interface may not be very familiar, the speed at which it tracks is it's exactly what you would expect. I'm going to go ahead and delete that actually. Delete that guy. To create a track, you can actually click this little plus button right here, and then it will let you drag one in. Or you can see it leaves that button on, and you can make as many as you like. It's adding them all up in here. I'm going to delete them all. Or I'm going to turn that back off. You can hold down Control and Alt on Windows. I would imagine Linux and Mac are something similar. Just experiment with a couple until you get this little green crosshairs, and then go ahead and click to drop your track. I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger and kind of center it there a little bit. You can see you've got your zoom window over here for fine placement, and the button I like to use up here, I basically leave all this kind of stuff at the default. except there is one that is incredibly useful. This one right here, center viewer. If you click on that, it won't drift off frame. It'll keep the track. It'll move the footage around the track. So let's go ahead and click that, and then right here we're going to track forward. Just click on that and you'll see it just zips right through it, and it looks great. Everything is looking really good. It looks like it's sticking pretty well. So yeah, so I think we're good with that one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to call that one, since we know we're going to do a corner pin here, this is the upper right of the corner pin. So I'm going to call that UR, upper right. And then we're just going to leave that be. I'm going to go back to the first frame, and let's go over here. And these bright highlights on these vines are really nice and contrasty. So let's go ahead and track those things. Come on, right there. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger just to be safe. And center and track forward. And it should be blazing fast. Looks great. Looks pretty solid. And I'm going to call that one upper left. Enter. Let's go ahead down here. This is perfect for tracking down here. So I'm going to drop another tracker here and make it a little bit bigger. And I'm in the middle here. So what I'm going to do, since I'm at 218, I forgot to go back to frame 181. Let's just track backwards from here. And then we can come right back to that frame and track forward from there. And same exact thing. Still creates a beautiful track. Works great. And we're going to call that one lower right, LR. And we've only got one more to do over here. Let's see what we got. Everything kind of stays really nice. I kind of want to stay out of this lens flare. There's some luminance changing here that could that might throw things off. It shouldn't. There's a normalize intensities. You can click that if you'd like, and we shouldn't have to worry about that now, but it's always safe to avoid things like that if you can, and in this case we definitely can. We've got plenty of stuff here to track. Let me try that again. I was getting some weird what's up with that? That's that blender the affine and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just gonna click again. I just want to make it a little bit bigger. That's what's it doing there. It's not because that's on, is it? Maybe weird. Yeah, so I'm just gonna track that thing and track forward, and it looks great. So I think this is gonna be good for our track. All right, let's call this one lower left. Enter. So yeah, I think that's perfect. You can see, looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and name this. It's very good to get into this habit of naming things. I'm going to call this wall track. If this is the only track we're going to have in here, it may not be a big deal to name it. But when you're working on a project that has 20 tracks in it, or 30 or 50, naming becomes really important. So just get into the habit. So to create a corner pin track from this, what we're going to do is we're going to go right here to the transform tab in the wall track properties. If you go over to transform, this is the transform generation. This is where you can create basically a transform node that you can apply to other footage that you bring in, or to apply to anything you want, and it will inherit that movement. So what we're going to do, make sure you're at frame 181, and our reference frame is not 0. Since our first frame is 181, we want to set it to current frame 181. Motion type, you can do stabilizing, match moving, remove jitter, add jitter. We're going to do match move, because everything that we plug into this node that we're about to create, we're going to want to match move to that wall. We're going to want it to stick to the wall. And then the transform type, we can leave it at corner pin, because that's going to be more useful, because we've got some interesting perspective stuff happening. So we're going to leave it on corner pin. And the only other thing to keep in mind here is this link button. There's a lot of other options here, and feel free to explore them. But for our purposes right now, we're going to click this export button, and it's going to create, let's just do it. Click export, and it creates a corner pin node. You can see right here. Let me get this out of the way. And you can see there's a green line attaching them. That green line is this link. Because we had link on, that means these values cannot be changed. You can see we can't do anything to it, right? Can't do anything. It breaks it. So why? No. This is what we want. That one. It thought I was pressing the viewer, so it put it into input 2. You can't change these because they're live linked back to this. If you want to change them, you have to change them here in your tracking values. And this isn't bad. It's fine. It'll work just fine for us. But if you turn that off and you export again, it will create one that is not linked. This one is baked. And you can actually, you can see if you go into your curve editor, there should be some keyframes for it. You can see you've got the keyframes right there. And this one will, it should not have, well, it shows you the keyframes, but you cannot adjust them. You cannot select them, or, oh yeah, you can, I guess, but you can't adjust them. Okay, so yeah, you can't do anything with them in this one. So those are the differences between linked and unlinked. I typically stick with the unlinked just because this kind of gets confusing when there's these lines. I mean, you can hide the lines. If you hit Shift-E, it hides them. So we can leave that in, actually. Let's use that one and just leave it in for now. And you can see, even if you hide the line, there's still a little E up here in the corner letting you know that there's an expression linking these two things. So I'm going to call this one, I'm going to call it wall C-pin 1. And that way I know it's the wall corner pin, and it's 1 because we're going to duplicate it a bunch of times. So next what we're going to do, we've got our track done, and we're going to use that throughout the project. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to paint out this window really quick. You can, if you wanted to, you could take your first frame 181, into a program like GIMP or Photoshop and paint that window out and then bring in that new still frame. Or you could just paint right here in Natron, which is just one of the great benefits of a compositing package with a paint tool in it. So we're just going to go ahead and do it in here. But feel free, if you're much more comfortable, if you don't feel like learning this right now, feel free to do it in your image editing program of choice. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this as is, right? Yeah, we're just going to put this off to the side. I like to keep my node graphs nice and in line. So I like everything moving down, and I like to keep my, well, this will make more sense later. But there's what's called a B-line, which is when you have a merge, not a blur, a merge. The B is the bottom, the A is the top. You're putting A over B, and you want to keep your B line when you plug things in here. You want to keep them all kind of right here. If we were to throw in another one here, you've got your B line. So the A's are all kind of off to the side and plugging in. Your main, the main trunk of your node tree is all the B's going straight down, which is exactly what you want. So I'm going to delete those for now. And I'm just letting you know that just because of where we're going to be placing nodes as we create them. I'm now going to create a paint node by hitting P. We've got our paint. We're still on frame 181. Excuse me. And we're going to get rid of this window right here. To do this, we've got to plug one of these backgrounds into our footage so that it knows what we're painting on. So I'm going to drag just the regular BG right into that. And we're ready to get going. So let's go ahead. Actually, you know what? You want to view it. So select it and hit 1 so that we're viewing the rotopaint node, or else you won't be able to see your strokes that you're making. And we're not going to use the pencil tool. You can see you've got a few pencil tools over here. You've got a paintbrush, pencil, eraser, and then you've got a clone and a reveal, a blur and a smear, and a dodge and burn. We're going to go with the clone tool. You've got some options up here for changing them around. You've got build up, time offset, all that kind of stuff. Multi-stroke, brush size, opacity. What I like to do is just do the brush size interactively in the viewer. If you just hold on shift and click and drag Oh, come on. There it is. You'll see that it lets you resize that brush interactively, which is incredibly useful. And we're going to leave the opacity at 1 for now. And we're going to use the control key. If you hold down control and click and drag, you'll see that it places, that's where you're cloning from. It places your clone source so that you can very accurately tell what you're cloning from. So let's go ahead now and just start painting this out. So you can see there's variations in the wall here. There's a brighter section and a darker section. So I'm kind of gonna pay attention to that and paint accordingly. So let's go like this and just paint. And I'm not worried too much about matching just yet. Now I'm going to grab from over here and kind of paint in there. That's looking pretty good so far. And let me get rid of that blue I put in here accidentally. And you know what else? We can actually paint from right here. Just kind of get rid of that thing, and that looks very nice. And we do not want that, so undo that and paint from here. It's painting on it's using the actual the raw plate. It's not using the all the strokes to clone from, so it's not a big deal. Undo that. You can just do it from elsewhere, which is not a big deal at all. And grab this thing, move it here a little bit. That doesn't look too good. I'm going to undo that. So it's all just a little bit of trial and error, a lot of undoing. Up here where the blue line begins, I'm actually going to... Oh, jeez, come on. What are you doing? Control, and I'm going to place this, the crosshairs of that source right on that blue line. And now you can see when I hold down control and do this, I can place this exactly at the angle of that blue line. So I can just paint it away. Perfect. Look at that. Looks great. So yeah, this looks pretty good right here, right? I think so. Let's make this, see if we can, I'm going to set the opacity now to like 0.25. And I'm going to use some of this over here to kind of see if I can paint over that. That doesn't look too good, so undo that. Use this a little bit maybe. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it's alright. Maybe let's use the darker. I'm trying to get this to blend a little better, that's all. And I think that kind of works alright. That looks pretty good. And if you want, you can even kind of clone this little gray line over here a little bit. Looks pretty good. So there we go. We've painted out that window. We're done here with the paint node. However, you will notice that over here in the tools for it, you can select all your strokes. You can actually, you can delete these or move them. I think you can move them. Interesting. You've got the blend node for stuff. And then you can also set the lifetime of it. Right now it's on single, so it's only going to appear on frame 181. So as we're looking at this, if we go to the next frame, I'm just using the arrow keys, you'll see that window pops back into existence. We don't want that. We want this basically to be our clean plate. We want to use this. We want to treat this frame 181 as a single frame. So what we're going to do is right after this rotopaint node, we're going to throw what's called a frame hold. So hit tab, start typing frame, and you'll see right there on top, frame hold, hit enter, and it jumps to frame 0. Hover over that and hit 181, and now we've got 181. And when you go to the next frame, it stays the same no matter what. So now we've got a full sequence of a painted out window. Next thing we're going to do is apply that motion to it, right? We're going to use this corner pin node we made to kind of apply that wall motion to this clean plate. So let's go ahead and drag that over. Oh, it's not letting me plug it in, so I'm just going to plug the source in right there and snap it right under and hit 1. So now if you kind of scroll through, you'll see that it moves now. It's still the single frame, but it's moving, which is exactly what we want. So now our paint patch has now inherited the movement of the wall. So the only other thing we have to do for this, I believe anyway, for now, is we need to bring our actors back, right? Our actors and all the plants that are moving, everything else that's alive in the footage, we want to bring back. If you take a look at your footage, you can see plants are moving, trees moving, all kinds of stuff is happening. Very subtly, there's film grain and stuff happening. Not film grain really, but more likely compression artifacts. But still, there's kind of a liveliness to this footage that you want to keep. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a mask for this window, and then that'll limit it to just this window area. So let's do that with a roto node. I'm going to click over here and hit O to create a roto node. I'm going to go back to that frame that we painted on, 181. And with this roto node selected, by default it already has you on the spline creation, draw Bezier. So you've got an ellipse and a rectangle tool as well. You've got some drawing tools, which I've never used in the roto node actually. And then you've got a few other tools for working with the splines and for selecting them as well. But we're going to leave it on that for now. And we're going to zoom right in here. And I'm just going to click a few times. I'm not going to click and drag. Clicking and dragging will create handles. And I just want sharp corners on my roto. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click here, here, and here, and then close it by clicking that first one again. I left a little buffer window, not a buffer window, kind of like a buffer zone around it. I left some space there because I know that we're going to want to blur this to blend it into the real plate. We don't want a sharp line. So I left a little room there to account for that blur that we're going to add. And you'll see it added these little lines here, these little extra little lines on each point. What are those? Those are for feathering. If we take a look at this, let me show you one more thing about the handles before we get into the feathering. Which we can actually use the feathering instead of the blur. If you can do this either way. We'll use the blur for this one, but then I'll show you the feathering way as well if you want. If you select a point and you hit Z, you'll see it turns it into a Bezier handle. And if you hit it again, you'll see it kind of grows it out and kind of smooths it a little bit. You can also grab these handles and move them around to really fine tune your roto. Or you can hold down Shift and click Z, and you'll see that it starts kind of shrinking it down to back down to a corner point, which is kind of what I would like for this mask. So I'm actually going to select all of these, and I'm going to hit Shift Z a couple times just to make sure they're all sharp corners, to make sure that I don't really have a really small handle in there or something. So I'm going to fine place these. You'll see it turned blue down here. What that did was it created a keyframe automatically. So we don't have to worry about setting keyframes or anything like that. It just does it automatically. If we were to go to another frame and move it, it would automatically set a keyframe there as well. But we're not going to have to worry about keyframing this one. So what these lines are, if you click on that line and drag, you'll see this dotted line, right? So if I undo that and we take a look at this roto, hit 1, right now it's all black, right? The RGB of a roto is all black. But if you hit A to look at the alpha channel, you'll see it's white. And that's telling you that this is opaque and this is all transparent, which is exactly what we want. If you work with this feather handle and click and drag that out, you'll see it creates a gradient there, which is very nice. It kind of does the job of a blur. So that's what these handles do, and you can kind of drag them out and set them individually, and they keyframe right along with the rest of the mask. So it's very useful. But again, like I said, we're going to use the blur technique. So I'm going to undo those, and I'm going to go back to my RGB channels, and we are going to go back to looking at this, because now we're going to plug in our roto. The way we're going to do this is right now our footage if we take a look at this, I'm going to close this actually just to get this roto mask out of the way. I'm going to click right here, and that will close that properties panel so I don't see this mask. I'm looking at the frame hold right now, and if I click to the alpha channel, I've got nothing, which means that when I put this, if I were to put this clean plate over top of the regular footage, you're going to be able to see through it because there's no alpha channel. So it's just going to kind of merge one over the other, but because there's no alpha channel, it's going to be this weird transparent thing. It's going to be a mess. So we have to create an alpha channel for this footage, and we want that alpha channel to be completely solid, which is white, which is the value of 1. Alpha channels should only be between 0 and 1, shades of gray, black, white, all that, just to define transparency. And the easiest way to create a full alpha channel in Natron is with a shuffle node, it's called. You can see it right here, shuffle, or you can hit tab and start typing shuffle, and it'll pop up. You can select it and hit enter. And what the shuffle node does is it allows you to shift channels around. So if you wanted to put if you wanted to make the red channel into the green channel, you could do that. If you wanted to make the blue channel the alpha channel, you could do that. This is a very useful node. So what we're going to do is I'm going to drop it in line here by holding down Control and just moving it over here, and I'm going to click and let go, and you'll see it automatically plugged it in after our paint, but before our frame hold, and it plugged it into the A input. So you can see if we look at our shuffle node here in the properties, it's got the A input red. So what it's saying is that the red channel that's coming out of this node is the A input's red channel. The green is the A input's green channel. The blue channel is the A input's blue channel. And then same with the alpha. Alpha is the A channel's alpha. If you wanted to switch alphas, you could plug something into it. We could plug this roto into it. We're not going to do it that way just because I'd rather show you the merge way. But you could plug in the roto into this other thing and then shift it right here, shuffle it around to make this the alpha channel for this frame, and that would be exactly what we want to accomplish. But for now, we're just going to make it a solid alpha. So in this shuffle node, under the alpha channel, that's the only one we want to change, we're just going to hit 1. If you click 1, it now says the alpha channel everywhere is 1. So it throws out all the old data and creates a new alpha channel for it. So now if we look at it and you hit A, the alpha channel is completely white, which is perfect. You can also see that down here in the, right down here, there's values as I'm moving the mouse around. Wherever the pointer is, you can see it's showing you those values, right? So up here, it's going to be a little brighter. Down here, it's going to be darker. And it's going to be darker still over here, so smaller values. But you'll notice that right now the alpha channel, the white number, is always staying at 1, and that's exactly what we want. All right, so we've got an alpha channel now. We've got our movement. We've got the window painted out. All we have to do is apply our roto. Let's name our roto. Call this, I'm going to call it window roto. That's fine. Window roto. And to plug it in, to use it, we're going to use a merge node. So click on frame hold and click M, and it will drop in a merge node. This is probably the second most used node right after a read node. And like I said earlier, all it does is it allows you to put A over B. So now we're going to plug in the roto into the A. And you're going to see what that does is it puts a black patch over that. And that is because if we look at our roto, the RGB channels are black, right? So they're all black, but our alpha channel is right there. So by putting that information, a black RGB with a solid roto, with a solid shape in there, it's just going to basically put that right over top of what we're looking at. So it's working correctly, even though this looks wrong. It's doing exactly what we're telling it to do. But what we're going to do is we're going to switch it. We're going to say use this to mask out everything. Use this as sort of like a stencil to kind of mask out all this other stuff we don't want. We only want to see this image right where that roto was. So here in the merge node over here in the operations, the most useful thing right here in it is this right here, and the default is over, and that just means exactly that. It's putting A over B. There's a million things in here, but there's honestly only about 4 that you're going to use a lot, and that is over, plus and screen. Plus will those are useful for bright things. If you're doing smoke, you would want to do like a screen where it doesn't actually create brighter areas. It just kind of puts a brighter thing over top of footage. Plus is going to actually add pixels together, so things are going to actually get brighter. That's good for things like glows and lens flares. Over is just a typical over. And then the other 2 things we're going to use a lot are mask and stencil. And those are basically, they're just opposites of each other. You'll see what's going to happen. If we set this to mask, exactly what's going to happen is that it's going to mask it. It's going to take this frame and it's going to mask it by this alpha channel, which is exactly what it's doing. And it's actually passing that alpha channel through as well. So coming out of this merge, our alpha channel is just that window, which is exactly what we want. We don't want anything over here. If we turn on our grid, our background grid, you can see there's nothing else there. And that is exactly what we want. Stencil is the exact opposite. Stencil is going to give you a hole there, where if we turn on our grid, you can see it's actually transparent there. But we're going to leave it at mask for now. So now we've got just a patch of paint that actually moves as it should, right? So let's put that over top of our footage. So I'm gonna select no nodes. I'm just gonna kind of click over here and hit M, drop a merge node. I'm gonna drag the B input up to that, and down here I'm gonna make some space here a little bit so I got room to work. I'm gonna move my viewer way down there. I actually like my viewer kind of off to the side, so I don't ever confuse it with the B line, because when these connection lines overlap, it starts getting confusing. So I kind of leave my viewer off to the side a little. And then we're going to plug the A input into our patch. So let's minimize that again, and let's take a look at this merge by selecting that and hitting 1. You can see now the window is gone. If you can check this by selecting that node and disabling it temporarily just by hitting D. If you hit D, you'll see it turns it off. It puts a little X through it. So now all that's happening is the footage is being passed through, and that's it. So you can kind of flicker this on and off, see exactly what's happening. And as we go to other frames, you can see it's moving exactly as it should, which is perfect. However, here's why I was showing you feathering and why I was saying that we're going to put a blur on it. You can see there's a sharp line here, right, where my paint lines did not match up perfectly, right? So you can see that sharp line. If we throw a blur on our roto, it'll soften that out. So let's select our roto and hit B, and you'll see it drops a blur right in line because we already had this selected. And I'm going to turn that blur up to maybe like 15, something like that. That doesn't look too bad. We can even try like 25. But you can kind of see maybe the window's starting to show through there a little bit. So let's turn that back down to 20. That probably looks great. So there you go. The window is gone. We've already used a whole bunch of tools. We've barely gotten started. We've used painting, we're rotoing, we're shuffling alpha channels, frame holding, blurring masks, applying masks. We've tracked. We've created a match move node, and we've effectively gotten rid of that window completely, which is spectacular. So if you preview this now, you'll see that window is gone, which is exactly what we wanted. So let's go ahead and move on to the next tutorial, where we will put in, we'll bring in the mural and actually start putting it in here as well, which is going to lead us to a few other problems we're going to have to solve using alpha channels. See you in the next one. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's save our project first. Whew, I was jumping the gun there, wasn't I? Let's go ahead up. Geez, we should have done this first. File, save project as. And you can see I've already got a whole bunch. I've got my my folder for this particular project. I've got a project. You can see I set things up very nicely. Open Visual Effects blog posts, Natron mural, and I've got a projects folder. Always good to be very precise. And I'm going to go with, I think I did a test of this somewhere. I've got a name already for it. Here it is. Pathway Mural Tutorial Shot 1. So I'm going to use that. If you don't have, obviously you're not going to have anything yet. Once you've picked your spot where you want to put it, do not type down in this window. Type only in this window. You can go, I'll just type it out. Pathway Mural. You can name it whatever you like. I'm going to call it tutorial because this is the actual tutorial we're doing. Shot 1 is shot 1 and it's version 1. And I think that's great. And I'm going to hit, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. It's going to ask me to replace it because I had already tried to do this tutorial once and I've already created that. So I'm just going to hit yes and save over it. And if you wait for a moment, it's because of my slow hard drive, my old fashioned, it's got to start spinning and all that. But once it does, you will see up here that your project is now named correctly. And look at that, waiting on my hard drive. But anyway, don't worry, it'll come back, and I will see you in the next tutorial where we will continue on with the mural.